Imagine a house so remote that the wind through the trees is the loudest sound you'll hear. The Mercer house stood 3 miles from the nearest neighbour, at the end of a road that sank into mud in spring and froze hard by November. By 1897, the Mercer family had lived there 11 years, yet the land seemed to hold its own memory, unspoken, waiting. Grass grew in the middle of the rutted road, and the echo of wagon wheels was long gone. Thomas Mercer had bought the property from a man named Calloway one bitter winter day in 1886. The transaction was strange, almost abrupt. Calloway accepted far less than the land's value, taking only a leather satchel and a small tintype photograph from the mantel. He left without explanation, leaving the furniture, bedding, and kitchenware behind. When Thomas asked why, Calloway simply said, "Take what you need, burn the rest." Thomas did neither. He moved his wife Catherine and their 3 children in, taking the house as it stood, sturdy, weathered, and oddly quiet. For the first 2 years, life was ordinary enough. The well ran deep, the soil behind the house was fertile, and Catherine planted vegetables where something had clearly grown before. Yet even in those early days, she noticed things that unsettled her, though she spoke of them only once. Heavy wool blankets were nailed to the windows facing the woods, no curtains, no frills, just raw fabric pinned into the frame. The back door, toward the same tree line, had 3 locks, each freshly installed, the wood around them still pale and new. When Catherine removed a blanket from one window to let in the cold winter light, Thomas quietly asked her to put it back. She complied, curiosity smothered by his calm but firm insistence. The Mercer children adjusted quickly, as children often do. Sarah, the eldest at 14, mirrored her mother's cautious nature, her dark hair catching the faint light of the room as she moved silently through the hall. William, 10, was curious in ways that unnerved Catherine. He would linger near the locked doors, peering at the shadows beyond, and Margaret, only 7, had begun whispering about someone watching from the woods, though she did not say it aloud to the adults. It was not the cold nor the isolation that bothered Catherine, but the subtle feeling that the house itself had been waiting for them. Some mornings she would awaken to faint sounds, the scrape of a chair across a floorboard that hadn't been moved, a soft thud against a wall where nothing hung, or the distinct sense of eyes on her as she prepared breakfast. She kept a journal, chronicling the day-to-day, the odd occurrences, the quiet tension that draped over the family like the winter fog that rolled across their fields. Even Thomas, practical and silent, began to show signs of strain. He checked the locks obsessively, glanced toward the tree line with furrowed brows, and sometimes muttered to himself about shadows moving just beyond the fence. The farm prospered, the land gave its yield, and yet a weight hung in the house, unseen but felt by all who dwelled within. That first winter, as snow drifted high against the eaves, the family would sit by the fireplace, trying to ignore the whispers of the wind, or perhaps something else, carrying through the trees. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Sarah noticed a small carved figure hidden in a crack behind the fireplace bricks. It was worn, barely recognizable, yet its eyes, tiny and obsidian, seemed to fixate on her in the flickering firelight. And as she reached for it, the figure seemed to tremble, as if aware that it had been discovered. Next, we uncover why Calloway left the house in such a hurry, and what secrets the Mercer family will stumble upon in the shadows of the woods. Disclaimer: this story is completely fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Chapter 2: Shadows in the Walls. The first snow had settled across the Mercer farm, a soft white that blanketed the fields and muffled every sound. From the house, the forest seemed a solid wall of black, a distant movement just beyond the line of trees like smoke curling through the shadows. Thomas and Catherine moved about their daily chores, yet the unease in the air had become almost tangible. Even the children, who should have been thrilled by winter, seemed quieter, more watchful, their small voices hushed when the wind rattled the windows. Catherine's journals grew longer that year, her words at first practical and detailed, how the vegetables fared, the snow's depth, the woodpile's condition, but gradually they turned toward unease. She wrote of the blankets over the windows, the locks on the doors, and the sensation that they were never truly alone. Some nights she would awaken to the sound of footsteps pacing the hall above her room. When she called for Thomas, he would rise silently, check the hall, and return without comment. But the footsteps never seemed to be his own. It was Sarah who first noticed the subtle changes in the house itself. The wood seemed to groan more sharply, the floorboards creaking in patterns that didn't match anyone's steps. At times, she thought she heard soft breathing through the walls, and once she swore she saw a shadow slip across the far room when the candlelight flickered. She mentioned it to William, who nodded solemnly and whispered, "It watches, you know, from the trees." Margaret's small hand would find hers during these moments, gripping tightly, her wide eyes darting toward the windows. One afternoon, Catherine discovered an old ledger tucked behind a loose brick in the pantry wall. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, yet the handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive. It chronicled the house's previous occupant, all of whom had departed under strange circumstances. Names were crossed out, dates erased, and each entry concluded with an identical phrase, "And it watches still." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine as she read, the words echoing the whispers of her own unease. Thomas, however, seemed resolute. He refused to discuss the ledger or the strange happenings, insisting the family focus on survival and practical work. But as the days passed, even his stoic demeanor began to fray. He took to walking the perimeter of the property at dusk, peering into the dark tree line with a hardened gaze, muttering about movement he could not account for. He began reinforcing the doors further, adding extra locks, nailing planks over the windows. At night, the house felt alive in ways Catherine could not explain. Candles would burn down inexplicably faster than expected. Footsteps echoed through empty halls. A persistent, subtle scratching would come from the walls, as though something moved just behind the plaster. Sarah began keeping vigil with her younger siblings, holding lanterns to peer into the dark corners where the shadows gathered. Then, one evening, a loud crash shattered the quiet. Catherine rushed from the kitchen to find the back door swinging open, snow drifting in, and the lock broken from the inside, as though unseen hands had forced it. The children huddled in the corner, wide-eyed, whispering about the eyes in the trees and the figure in the fireplace. Thomas grabbed his rifle, scanning the darkness beyond the yard, but there was nothing, only the wind and the snow-covered silence. And that night, Catherine awoke to a low whisper at her bedside, a voice that seemed almost human, yet not her husband's. It murmured, "They see you." Next we will follow Sarah as she ventures into the woods alone, determined to uncover who, or what, has been watching the Mercer family for years. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Chapter 3. Into the Woods. The forest behind the Mercer house seemed alive that winter, though it was silent in the most unnatural way. Branches stretched like fingers toward the sky, snow-laden and heavy, and the wind whistled through them, carrying faint, half-heard sounds that teased the mind. Sarah, now 14, could not shake the feeling that the trees themselves were sentinels, watching every movement. She had tried to ignore it, but curiosity gnawed at her, and the whispers, sometimes her imagination, sometimes something else, urged her forward. One grey afternoon, after Thomas had gone to check on the livestock, Sarah told William and Margaret to stay behind, warning them not to follow. With a lantern and a small pocket-knife, she stepped into the woods. The snow crunched underfoot, leaving a trail of uneven footprints that quickly disappeared under the next falling flake. The air was sharp and biting, and the smell of wet pine needles was pungent, almost suffocating. Every step made her heart beat faster, as if the forest itself were counting them. She remembered the old ledger Catherine had found, the pages that spoke of the previous inhabitants, and the phrase, "And it watches still." It haunted her, a whisper of the past echoing in the present. She pressed on toward a place she could barely describe, a clearing she had noticed from the upstairs window, a break in the dark wall of trees where snow glittered like crushed glass. Here, she felt the eyes most keenly, the gaze of something unseen pressing into her back, brushing along her skin like a cold, invisible hand. Suddenly she stumbled across the remains of a small campfire, blackened and long-cold, yet oddly arranged, as though someone had recently used it and left in a hurry. Around it lay small trinkets, a cracked porcelain doll, a carved wooden figure, and tiny pieces of cloth. Each item seemed delicate, berately placed, almost ritualistic. Sarah knelt to examine them, running her fingers over the cold wood and faded paint. She shivered, realizing that someone, or something, had been here, watching, waiting, arranging these things for her to find. A rustling to her left made her freeze. A branch snapped sharply underfoot, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She swung her lantern toward the sound, but nothing moved, only the snow, settling in slow flakes, drifting through the grey light. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Somewhere deeper in the trees, she thought she heard whispers again, soft but distinct, like someone counting, 1, 2, 3. But when she strained to listen, the sound vanished. Heart racing, Sarah rose to leave, but a sudden gust of wind slammed through the clearing, tossing her lantern to the snow. The flame flickered violently before dying, leaving her in the oppressive grey dimness. Panic surged, and she stumbled backward, trying to retrace her steps. Then she saw it, a figure between the trees. Not fully formed, more shadow than flesh, standing perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Its head tilted slightly, and for a moment Sarah could swear it had eyes. Small, dark, unblinking eyes that pierced her very soul. Frozen, she could not move, could not call out, as the figure took a single, deliberate step closer. And in that instant, the crunch of snow behind her alerted her to something else, another presence, silent and sinister, watching her from the edge of the clearing. Next, we will uncover what Sarah discovers about the mysterious figure, the origin of the watching, and the shocking secrets hidden in the Mercer family's past. Chapter 4. The Figure in the Snow. Sarah's lungs burned from cold and fear as the shadow in the clearing moved closer, silent except for the subtle crunch of snow beneath its feet. It was taller than any man she had seen, its form draped in dark fabric that seemed to melt into the grey haze of the forest. Her lantern lay broken behind her, the last flicker of light snuffed out, leaving her in a world of shifting grey and black. A voice, low and almost whispering, came from the figure. "You shouldn't be here." It was not a threat, not quite, but it carried a weight that made Sarah's knees weak. She stepped back, the snow rising above her ankles, her knife trembling in her hand. The figure did not advance, merely stood, watching, as if gauging her intent, reading her very thoughts. Sarah's eyes darted toward the second movement she had sensed. There, at the edge of the clearing, two glowing points reflected what little light remained. She blinked, but they remained, fixed and unyielding. Fear coiled tightly in her stomach. "Who's there?" she demanded, voice cracking. No answer came, only the shifting shadow and the frozen silence. In desperation, she remembered the carved figure in the fireplace at home, the one that had trembled when touched. She dug into her coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook Catherine had given her, her first journal entry in ink. Perhaps, she thought, if she wrote down what she saw, it would anchor her reality. The shadow in the clearing moved again, this time not toward her, but to a fallen tree. It crouched beside it and began arranging objects, stones, twigs, something resembling a tiny ladder. The motions were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Her pulse raced. This was not a person, not exactly, at least not a human one she recognized, and yet it moved with intelligence, with a careful purpose that chilled her blood. Sarah wanted to run on, but something held her in place. Curiosity, terror, and a strange recognition mingled in her mind. She noticed faint markings carved into the snow, patterns that reminded her of shapes she had seen in the ledger at home, the same repeating symbols etched in the handwriting of those who had lived here before. It watches still. It always watches. A sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, and the shadow vanished in an instant, leaving only the faint arrangement of stones and sticks, the strange ladder, and the echo of soft breathing that was not her own. Her heart pounded as she realized she was utterly alone, or at least alone in the way she understood the word. The forest seemed to close in, the trees leaning toward her as though they were about to speak. Just as she turned to flee, something cold and rigid pressed against her shoulder. She whirled, knife raised, only to find nothing. The snow was pristine where she had stood, no footprints, no sign of intrusion. The clearing was empty, yet the feeling of being watched remained, more intense than before. She raced back toward the house, her boots sinking into deep snow, limbs burning from exertion. The windows of the Mercer house finally came into view, and for a brief moment, relief washed over her. But as she reached the porch, she froze. On the freshly fallen snow, leading from the tree line straight to the door, were footprints, small, precise, and far too numerous for just one person. Next, we explore the Mercer family's first encounter with someone from the past, an inhabitant who knows the true history of the house, and the horrifying revelation that their lives may have always been under watch. Chapter 5. The Visitor from the Past. The morning after Sarah's encounter, the Mercer household was tense in ways they could not speak aloud. Catherine noticed the pallor of Thomas's face as he examined the snow outside. The footprints she had seen in the clearing the day before now led right up to the back door, then disappeared as if whoever or whatever had made them had melted into the house itself. Before anyone could discuss the matter further, a knock came at the front door. It was mid-morning, and the family was startled. No visitor had come down the rutted road in years. Thomas opened the door to find an elderly man standing there, bent with age, clad in a coat that had once been dark, but was now faded by years of exposure to wind and sun. His eyes, sharp and unsettling, seemed to take in every corner of the porch before settling on Thomas. "I'm looking for someone who knows about this place," the man said, voice cracked and brittle with age. "Calloway sold it years ago, but some things never leave." Catherine stepped forward, shielding the children slightly behind her. "Who are you?" she asked. "And how did you find us?" "My name is Hollis. I knew Calloway, and before him others who lived here." He gestured vaguely toward the house. "I've been trying to warn you." Thomas, ever practical, frowned. "Warn us about what?" Hollis did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the snow, muttering to himself. "The house. It remembers. It keeps a ledger of all who dwell here. And the forest? It is patient. It watches. Always watches." Sarah, who had been listening from behind the corner of the doorframe, felt her stomach tighten. This was the first time anyone had spoken of what she had glimpsed in the clearing. She stepped closer, eyes wide. "I saw it," she said softly. "I saw someone there, in the snow." Hollis's gaze shifted to her, piercing. "Yes, you saw it. That is why you are here and why you will need to know. There are things buried in the walls, hidden in the woods, things that call to certain people, and the house ensures it keeps them close. You've been chosen to understand." The children exchanged nervous glances. Margaret clutched Sarah's arm. William's eyes flicked toward the north window, the one with the blankets still nailed in place. "Chosen for what?" he whispered. Hollis opened his coat, revealing a small, worn leather bag. He pulled out a bundle of papers and photographs, yellowed with age. Among them was a photograph of Calloway, older but unmistakable. The same man who had sold the house, holding the same tintype Thomas had once seen on the mantel. Around him, shadowed shapes moved almost imperceptibly, like figures caught in the background. "These," Hollis said, laying them on the table, "belong to those who came before you. People who lived here, people who disappeared, always watched until they learned what the house wanted. Calloway. He left early, but he left traces." Catherine reached for the papers, her fingers trembling. "What do you mean, traces?" Hollis's eyes grew darker. "Markings in the walls, symbols in the snow, carvings in wood. Things the children might notice. Things that whisper to them in their sleep. The house communicates. And now, you must listen. Otherwise, the forest will claim more than your sleep." A sudden noise, a thud from the back room, made them all freeze. Hollis stiffened, his head tilting toward the north window. Outside, the snow shifted under invisible weight. The blankets on the windows seemed to ripple, and Sarah felt a familiar chill crawling along her spine. The house was reminding them that it had always been watching. Next, we will follow the Mercer family as they investigate the hidden marks, discovering evidence of those who vanished before them, and a warning that what watches will not be ignored. Chapter 6. Marks of the Forgotten. That night, Catherine could not sleep. Hollis had left after giving them the bundle of photographs and papers, but his warnings lingered, heavy as the snow outside. She walked the house quietly, listening to the creak of floorboards and the subtle groan of the walls, her fingers brushing over carved initials and strange symbols that seemed to appear where the plaster met the wood. The house had begun to reveal its secrets. Sarah, meanwhile, had taken it upon herself to study the carvings in the fireplace. The small figure she had found weeks ago, the one that trembled, was connected to the etched marks on the wood and stone. She traced them carefully with her fingers, the symbols forming patterns that seemed familiar yet incomprehensible. Some resembled letters, others tiny human figures, all twisted in ways that made her stomach churn. William and Margaret slept fitfully, whispering in their dreams about eyes in the trees and footsteps that did not belong. Sarah felt a tug of responsibility, a strange weight pressing on her shoulders, as if the house had chosen her to interpret the language of the walls. She returned to the north windows, nails still in place, blankets undisturbed. Peering past them, she could see the forest, a dark mass beyond the yard. Movement flickered in the shadows. In the kitchen, Catherine discovered that the papers Hollis had left were more than photographs. Some contained maps, crude diagrams of the property with cryptic symbols marked at specific points, the clearing, the well, the back fence. Others were diary entries of previous occupants, describing a presence they could not name, but whose gaze was always upon them. Some wrote of whispers at night, others of shadows that moved with purpose. Thomas, initially skeptical, could not ignore what Sarah and Catherine had uncovered. That evening he gathered to the family by the fireplace. "We need to understand what we are dealing with," he said, voice low, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Hollis warned us, but we have to see for ourselves." They began inspecting the house systematically. In the attic, behind loose boards, they found small trinkets buried, shards of pottery, dried herbs, and bits of string tied into knots. Each item seemed deliberate, as though part of a ritual. Catherine documented them meticulously in her journal. The children, hesitant, were drawn in despite their fear, Sarah in particular. She felt a strange connection to the objects, as though they were part of a puzzle only she could solve. The night deepened. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Snow drifted higher against the walls, and the sound of cracking ice from the frozen well punctuated the silence. In the middle of this, a low scratching began from the back room, soft at first, then deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails on wood. The family froze. Thomas retrieved his rifle, hand shaking slightly. Sarah's eyes darted toward the fireplace, expecting to see the carved figure again. William clutched Margaret, whispering about eyes watching through the blankets. Catherine whispered a prayer, her journal open beside her, pen ready to record whatever came next. Then a single knock echoed from the wall behind them, hollow, deliberate, and impossible. And with it came a voice, low and chilling, whispering their names one by one, as though the house itself was speaking. Next, we will follow the Mercer family as they trace the origins of the carved figure and the symbols, uncovering a link between the house, the forest, and those who vanished before them. Chapter 7. The carved figure's secret. The next morning, the snow lay thick across the fields, but the Mercer house felt heavier than ever. Sarah, unable to resist, returned to the fireplace where she had first found the carved figure. Its small obsidian eyes seemed to glint in the dim morning light. She lifted it carefully and discovered, tucked into a hollow in its base, a tiny, rolled piece of paper. The handwriting was old, spidery, almost illegible, yet deliberate. Unrolling it, Sarah read aloud to herself, "The watcher comes for those who linger. Only the chosen may see beyond." A shiver ran through her. The words confirmed what she had feared all along. The house, the forest, the symbols. They were not random. They were part of a network of attention, a system that had been active for generations. Catherine, noticing Sarah's agitation, approached cautiously. "What did you find?" she asked. Sarah showed her the figure and the note. Catherine's brow furrowed, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the house pressing down, as though the walls themselves had grown impatient. Thomas, still skeptical but uneasy, suggested they explore the attic further. There, behind more loose boards, they discovered additional figures, tiny carvings, each unique, each with faint inscriptions similar to the one Sarah held. Some were human, some animal, others abstract. Patterns emerged. Symbols repeated, the same shapes found in the ledger, in the snow patterns, in the marks on the walls. Sarah noticed one figure had a hollow beneath it, carved in a manner similar to hers. She opened it and found another rolled note. "The watchers record the children. They see what you cannot." Her pulse quickened. "They're watching us," she whispered. Outside, the wind rattled the north windows. William tugged on her sleeve. "Look," he said, pointing toward the forest. Shadows shifted unnat, eerily, flickering between the trees. Margaret whimpered softly, clutching Catherine's coat. The feeling was unmistakable. They were being observed, their every move catalogued. Hollis's words returned to Catherine's mind. "The house communicates, and now you must listen." They had listened, and now they understood a little more, but not enough. The figures, the symbols, the carved notes, they all hinted at a history buried deeper than they could imagine. As night fell, the family gathered around the fireplace. Sarah studied the carvings again, trying to decipher their meaning. The room seemed colder, the shadows longer. Then, from somewhere behind the walls, came a soft scratching, deliberate and precise. It was followed by a faint whisper. "Do not leave the clearing." Sarah froze. "The clearing?" she asked. Thomas stiffened, realizing that the clearing in the woods, the place she had ventured, was somehow a focal point for whatever watched them. Before anyone could react, a loud thud echoed from the floor above, where no one had gone. They looked at one another, dread pooling in their stomachs. The house, it seemed, had made its presence known once more. And then, a cold gust blew through the chimney, scattering papers from the ledger across the floor. In the flickering firelight, Sarah saw a shadow, distinct and humanoid, move across the far wall, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Next, the Mercer family will venture back into the woods, uncovering the origin of the Watcher and confronting a truth older than the house itself. Chapter 8. The Clearing's Secret. The following morning, Thomas decided it was time to investigate the clearing more thoroughly. Snow crunched under his boots as he led Sarah, William, and Margaret through the forest. Every step seemed watched. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels. The wind whispered between the branches, carrying hints of movement that no one could see clearly. The clearing lay ahead, a perfect circle in the grey expanse. Snow glittered over the small ritualistic items Sarah had seen before. Stones arranged in patterns, twigs forming ladder-like shapes, and tiny carvings peeking through the frost. The arrangement was more intricate than before, as if the forest itself had adjusted overnight. Sarah bent down, tracing the lines with her fingers. The carvings mirrored the symbols in the ledger and the attic figures. Suddenly, William froze. "Look," he whispered, pointing to a series of footprints leading from the forest's edge to the clearing, distinct from their own. The tracks were small, humanoid, yet impossibly precise. They circled the clearing, returning to the forest as if the Watcher had been pacing, observing. Catherine shivered. It's alive," she murmured. Not in the way of a person, but something aware, patient, and calculating. The air itself felt thick, heavy with expectation. Sarah's eyes fell on a faint indentation beneath the snow, a shallow depression, too regular to be natural. Kneeling, she brushed away the snow to reveal another small figure, identical to the one in the fireplace but larger and older, with intricate carvings across its back. She lifted it carefully. Inside, she discovered another note. "Only those who dare to see may survive the eyes. Her pulse quickened. The house, the forest, the figures, it was all part of a system, a test of observation and endurance. She glanced at her parents. Thomas's jaw was tight, Catherine's fingers trembling. The children's wide eyes reflected fear and fascination alike. Then, without warning, a low groan echoed through the clearing. The snow at the forest edge shifted, a mass moving slowly, deliberately. Sarah's heart stopped as she realized it was a shadowy figure, taller than any human, cloaked in darkness. It didn't approach in a straightforward way, but seemed to glide, the snow barely disturbed beneath it. The family huddled together as the figure paused, tilting its head, observing them. Its shape was humanoid, yet no face was visible. Only the impression of eyes, deep and unblinking, stared into their souls. A soft scratching began again, like fingers tracing symbols into the snow, moving in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Margaret whimpered, pressing close to Catherine. "It knows us," she whispered. Sarah nodded silently. Somehow, this clearing, this ritual site, was the heart of the watching. And the figure, it had always been here, unseen, waiting for them to uncover the truth. A sudden gust of wind swirled through the clearing, lifting snow into the air. The shadow moved back, disappearing into the forest with unnatural speed. The figures, the notes, the ritual items remained, but something had changed. The forest itself seemed to pulse, alive, alert, expectant. And then, a faint whisper drifted on the wind, chilling their bones. "Do not return alone." Next, the Mercer family will explore the attic and uncover evidence that suggests the Watcher is not just observing them, but has been guiding events in the house for decades. Chapter 9. The Attic's Revelation. That night, the Mercers gathered in the attic by candlelight, hesitant yet compelled. The air was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. Loose floorboards creaked beneath their weight as they explored. Sarah carried the carved figure, its obsidian eyes glinting in the flickering flame. Behind a stack of old trunks, she noticed a faint outline on the wall, a hidden door, covered in years of grime and cobwebs. Thomas pried it open. Inside was a small compartment containing journals, more carved figures, and bundles of dried herbs. Catherine shivered as she traced the old symbols etched into the walls. These were the same as those in the clearing and on the fireplace figure. Sarah flipped through one of the journals. The entries were written by a previous inhabitant, a woman named Eliza, who described being watched relentlessly, noting the patterns of the Watcher and the carved figures. "It tracks us. It records our fears and our choices. It will not let us leave until it is satisfied." Sarah read aloud, her voice trembling. William spotted a trap door in the corner. As Thomas pried it open, a chill rushed from below, carrying the scent of damp earth. The compartment revealed a series of tunnels beneath the house, shallow but winding, with carvings lining the walls. Every symbol mirrored those in the ledger, the attic, and the clearing. The house itself was a labyrinth of observation, and the Watcher had orchestrated it all. A sudden thump upstairs made them jump. The floorboards groaned, and a faint whisper drifted down the stairwell. "They see everything." Margaret clutched Catherine's coat, wide-eyed. The family realized the house itself was a cage, and the Watcher, patient and unseen, had always been in control. "Did you know? One of the most well-documented haunting cases in history occurred in Enfield, London, between 1977 and 1979, at a family home on Green Street. Reports began when Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children experienced strange phenomena: furniture moving on its own, loud knocks on walls, toys being thrown, and strange voices. Police officers responded to the home and reported seeing a chair slide across a room without explanation. Neighbors, journalists, and paranormal investigators also claimed to witness objects moving and loud, unexplained sounds over weeks. Paranormal researchers Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair spent months investigating and recorded knocking sounds and odd activity around the two sisters at the center of the case, Janet, 11, and Margaret, 13. Some believed the events were paranormal, while skeptics suggested trickery or hoaxes by the children. Although controversial, this case was widely covered by newspapers, investigated by experts, and has become part of modern paranormal lore, even inspiring the Conjuring 2 film. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Past. The next day, Sarah and William ventured into the tunnels with lanterns. Symbols glowed faintly in the dark, carved centuries ago. They found remnants of previous occupants, clothing, toys, and notes detailing disappearances. The Watcher had been active for generations, each family catalogued, each child observed. Suddenly, a scraping sound echoed. The shadows shifted unnaturally. Something moved ahead, leaving tiny footprints in the dirt, too precise for a child, too deliberate for an animal. Sarah whispered, "It's following us." And immediately the tunnel seemed to breathe, the walls pressing inward, as if alive. At the tunnel's end, they discovered an alcove containing a massive carved figure, larger than any they had seen, eyes black voids, staring directly at them. Beneath it, a note read, "The Watchers choose, the house decides, and those who see must obey." A chill raced down Sarah's spine. They were not merely observed, they were being judged. Chapter 11. Nightfall in the House. That evening, Thomas and Catherine barricaded the doors and windows, but the unease persisted. From the walls came soft scratching and whispers, rhythmic and intentional. The figures in the attic seemed to tremble as if alive, their eyes following each movement. Margaret woke screaming, "They're in the walls!" Catherine held her tightly. Thomas aimed his rifle toward the north window, heart racing. Outside, the snow shifted under invisible weight. The family realized that the Watcher could move beyond sight, appearing and vanishing at will. A loud crash came from the attic. The figures inside had toppled over, forming an arcane pattern that glowed faintly in the firelight. The Watcher's presence felt immediate, close, and terrifying. Chapter 12. The Watcher, Revealed. Sarah resolved to confront the Watcher. Following the pattern of symbols in the clearing and the attic, she ventured alone into the forest. Snow swirled around her as shadows moved with uncanny speed. In the clearing, the massive figure appeared. Tall, black, humanoid, but shifting, almost fluid. It spoke, voice low and reverberating. "You see me now, because you are ready. Those before you failed. Do not fail." Sarah stepped closer, heart pounding. In that moment she understood. The Watcher was not human. It was an entity born of fear, ritual, and observation, a force tied to the house and the forest. She turned to run, but the snow shifted. Figures appeared all around, shadows of past Watchers, their hollow eyes fixed on her.
Chapter 13. The Choice. The Mercers realized that to survive, they must obey the Watcher's rules. The carved figures, the symbols, the clearing, they were part of an ancient system. Catherine, Thomas, Sarah, William, and Margaret had to follow its logic, replicate patterns, observe symbols, leave notes, all while resisting panic. But the Watcher demanded perfection. One mistake could trap them forever, as it had trapped the families before. The walls seemed to lean inward, whispering in unison, "Observe, obey, survive." Sarah trembled. The figures in her hands vibrated subtly as though alive. She knew the choice before them: follow the ritual or be consumed by the house and the Watcher's endless gaze. Chapter 14. The Endless Watch. The Mercers worked together, replicating the patterns in the clearing, placing the figures precisely, and tracing symbols on the walls. Hours passed like days. The forest and house seemed to watch, breathing around them, pressing in. Finally, as dawn broke, the shadows receded slightly. The house seemed to sigh, the walls still murmuring faintly. They had survived, for now, but the Watcher had not vanished. Its eyes remained, hidden in the shadows, patient, cataloguing, waiting for the next mistake, the next visitor. Sarah looked at her family. They were alive, but forever changed. The house, the figures, the forest, they had been marked. And in the quiet, a soft whisper echoed through the trees. "We will see you again." The Mercer family had endured, but the Watcher's presence was eternal, a dark, silent force in the shadows, always observing, always patient.